So anyways, I'm really excited to be here. It's pretty amazing that this size audience has come together around the topic of bots, something that really wasn't on the top of many people's minds or tongues just 7 months ago. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happened since then, but I'm going to start going all the way back to 1968. You guys know who this guy is? Doug Engelbart, that's right. For those of you who don't, I highly recommend you go on YouTube and find his mother of all demos. He was working down in Park on a number of projects back then, specifically around the theme of augmenting human intellect. And to talk about like big, hairy, audacious goals, this is among the top of them. What he did with his demo was introduce a number of concepts and technologies and ideas that the world had never seen before, and actually gave a live demo of this happening. So everything that sort of led to the web, that gave us the mouse, that gave us video conferencing, that gave us essentially Google and everything else, started back in 1968. And we're still working on that legacy. However, work at that time was defining the way that we used technology, the way that we used computers, the way that we related to computers, as well as the office environments that defined how we worked. So this is sort of more or less what computing looked like back then. Now, Marshall McLuhan came out and said some interesting things about the mediums that we create, which is that essentially over time, we shape our tools, and then our tools start to in turn shape us. And there's this interesting dynamic in terms of the way that we extend ourselves as humans into the world. And we now have this enormous network, which of course we heard about this morning with Machine Zone and that stuff, that is changing our ability to manipulate our environment, and in turn our environment is going to manipulate us as well. But I don't think this actually really shifted, of course I fast forward a little bit, until 2007, when Steve Jobs essentially redefined the way that humans relate to their technology. It wasn't just about getting work done anymore. This was now an entertainment device. It was a communications device. It was an internet device. It was a tool for enabling us as individuals to communicate with the people and family members and friends that we have in our lives in a more efficient way. This was no longer just about having a business product. This also gave us several new primitives or assumptions in the medium, which is that now we had a mutable touchscreen instead of hardware keys. We had always-on connectivity, mostly all-day battery life, depending on what you're doing. We had design-driven innovation, as opposed to checklists of features that you sell to the enterprise. And we also had socially driven discovery and adoption. Essentially through Facebook and other social networks like Twitter, people started to discover and find out about the apps that other people were using, and then started to imitate those behaviors. Now the thing that's been interesting about this is that we are living through an inflection point where the way in which we connected through social networks had been defined by that previous era, the desktop era of computing. As we move into the mobile, the truly mobile era of the web, we're seeing that messaging actually is the killer app of these devices. And so what implications are there in that? So earlier this year in January, I wrote a post that described this phrase that I called conversational commerce, which actually someone else had sort of worked on before. His name's Dandy from Opus. You can talk to him about his ideas. But this sort of came to me as a way of describing this shift, which I confusionally described as interacting with brands, services, or bots in this bidirectional, asynchronous messaging context. In other words, where you talk to your friends, you're now going to start to talk to brands and businesses. I think Mary Meeker put it better in her report where she said that we're evolving from simple social conversations to business-related conversations. She has a better way of words, I guess. So one of the best examples of this so far that I saw in December was, of course, the integration of Uber into Facebook Messenger. If you haven't seen this before or you haven't tried it, I highly recommend it. If you're talking to a friend and you say, hey, I'd like to meet you somewhere, let's get a ride, Messenger will actually suggest that you can complete that whole action within Messenger without going to the Uber app itself. Uber is not in the business of building apps per se. They are a technology and logistics company. This allows us to deliver our service to people wherever they are without even have to worry about downloading the app. So let's put this all into context. Back in, let's say, December 2015, essentially you had the Slack platform where they were starting to build out bots, and you had the Uber integration into Messenger. This is when I wrote my post on conversational commerce saying, hey, I think there's some signals here suggesting that something's going to happen. In February, we launched the integration, the skill, into Alexa that allowed you to call an Uber using this sort of like first so-called room computer. In March, Of course, Microsoft launched Tay to glowing reviews, as well as the bot framework, and announced Skype bots as well. In April, Kik launched their bot store. Telegram, the 2.0 version of the Telegram platform came out. And at F8, of course, Messenger was one of the biggest things that we saw there. In May, Twilio moved big into messaging. Google announced a bunch of random things that I haven't figured out yet, but mostly Allo and Assistant. And of course, just recently in June, Apple announced the iMessage SDK. So if you look back to that little asterisk in the beginning, when I said, hey, I think there's something going on here, suddenly we have all these platforms. Now, of course, this represents billions of users, but there's still another 1 billion users left to sort of come onto the platform stage, and of course, that's WhatsApp. And so maybe later this fall, we'll see what they have to offer. So what I find so funny about this moment in time is that back in December, of course, all the VCs were like, oh, all the money's going away. There's not any money left. We spent it all. It's time to go into sort of like a nuclear winter. But of course, we're sort of fickle in Silicon Valley. Whenever we see something new, we track to it immediately. And so there's a number of signifiers that are going on that I think are worth pointing out, some of which include money going into specific platforms with the Slack fund. BotCamp is actually kicking off. I'm speaking there on Thursday. And of course, Phil Lieben is putting money into the space. So there's VCs getting excited about what's happening here. There's already been some exits where Doodle bought Meekin recently, which is a Slack scheduling assistant. And of course, Facebook is touting their 11,000 chatbots that are available since the platform launched. And there's a long tail of independent platform makers, tool providers, the picks and shovel makers that are enabling this to happen rapidly. Of course, this slide is not complete. It's changing all the time. One of the questions that I get asked a lot, of course, is will bots replace apps? And we've already heard a little bit about this today, but I think my answer should be clear. No. These things tend to exist along a spectrum. So if we had the web in the early days, which responded to the environment, the medium in which it was launched was sort of the academic world, and a world where documents were being shared, we moved to apps to distribute functionality. Now we're in the world of bots. We're moving into the messaging space and allowing people to access these services while they're on the go. So a couple thoughts on what's next. I'm really interested in the question of bot ethics. Essentially, we're in this moment where there's a lot of really bad and really good things that can happen, and it comes down to a lot of the people and the decisions that they make in this room. So a bot should be able to describe itself, what it does, how it handles information, whether or not there's a human on the other side monitoring things, like when you call up customer service and they're like, oh, this call may be monitored. Bots should have a similar type of disclosure statement. Bots and groups is also incredibly interesting, and most of the bots that I've seen so far, except in Slack, of course, are focused on the single user use case. But really, in terms of augmenting human potential, allowing groups to collaborate more efficiently and access information from remote services, I think, becomes very, very valuable. And there's a huge opportunity for this. There's also the opportunity with personal bots. These are the few that exist today. I think that the way in which these bots, as you can see for Sandy McPherson's bot, brings together all these disparate sources of content and information and finally aggregates it in the context of the person. And so for myself, I launched my own Messina bot a couple weeks ago to do the same thing. It's on the one hand sort of an interactive FAQ, but it also allows you to schedule office hours with me, or to get in touch with me to find out when I'm speaking next, or to get my cocktail recipes to make awesome drinks. One of the integrations that I find very compelling and that brings home this opportunity with bots to be more contextually and personally relevant is that if you connect my bot to your Uber account, and especially for you guys who are not from around San Francisco, and you go out in the city and you drive around in Uber, Uber will tell my bot where you're going, and it'll look up my tips on Foursquare and tell you we should go eat, right? So presuming you think I have good taste, this creates an enormous re-engagement opportunity for my bot to build a relationship with you over time that ideally would learn and then respond to whatever your tastes and preferences are. So to wrap this up, to go back to 1968, we're still on this journey, and we're still building out the legacy that Doug Engelbart and other folks of that era set for us. I think it's very important in an event like this, especially at the start of this new type of industry, to keep these things into perspective and to keep our goals in mind. It's not just about berating users with more notifications and finding another way of increasing the size of the funnel. It's actually about serving people and the relationships that they have with the world and the things in it. And so with that, I send you on your way. Thank you.